Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about my recipe with the Kalita Wave. So here is the Kalita 155. It's a single cup flat bottom brewer. It's got 3 little holes in the bottom and 3 little ridge pieces of metal to keep your paper filter a little elevated from the holes so that it doesn't clog. All right, so let's compare the Kalita 155 that we're brewing with today to the 185, the bigger brother here. This one's used for brewing, 2 or 3 cups of coffee, whereas with the 155 you can really only brew 1 cup at a time. And I'll get into why I prefer the 155. It might be a little hard to see here on camera, but you can kind of see the difference in the angles of the walls. The 185 obviously has much more of an angle outwards this way, whereas the 155 is much closer to straight. And this really does affect flow rate at identical grind sizes, basically. The 185 has a tendency to choke, which you may have heard from others before, whereas the 155 doesn't suffer from this problem quite as much. And we at Subtext think that has to do with mostly the angle of the walls. And we've also experienced this with some other brewers that have similar angled walls and a flat bottom design. So why flat bottom over, say, cone or immersion? The biggest one is, for me, it's the evenness of extraction that you can attain with a flat bottom. Not that you can't attain even extraction with, say, a V60 or another percolator, but I find it a little bit easier to brew with, a little bit more forgiving in terms of pour technique, and yeah, overall there's a little bit less bypass going on with the Kalita when you compare it to the V60. So this is just something to keep in mind when deciding between the 2 brewers, and also your preference for taste. Let's get into what you're going to need. So I've got 14 grams of coffee pre-weighed right here. Obviously you need the Brewer Kalita Wave. I've got a kettle with some fresh filtered water. This is a variable temperature kettle. If you don't have one, that's totally fine. You can just use a stovetop or an electric kettle. I've got it set to 97 degrees Celsius here, so if you're just boiling your water, that's essentially 10-15 seconds after the boil. Start brewing. And then, of course, a grinder. Here we're using the Baratza Encore. Any grinder will do, although we recommend using a burr grinder with stepped adjustments for the best results. And then use a carafe or cup to brew into. Today I'm going to use a carafe. All right, let's get grinding. Before we get to brewing, I'm just going to give the paper filter a rinse here. This is going to be twofold. We're going to rinse any paper taste out of the filter, but also preheat our vessel before brewing for optimal results. All right, while that's rinsing out, let's explain my recipe a little bit. So we've got 14 grams of coffee. This is ground a little bit on the finer side. So on an Encore, I'm at setting 15. I find that when brewing on the Kalita 155 on this grinder, I'm generally between 15 and 19. With lighter roasted coffee, you can generally push it finer. And if you're using something a bit darker or from specific origins, you might want to go coarser. So we've got 14 grams of coffee. I'm going to have 235 grams of water. which gives me a ratio of coffee to water that's close to 17 to 1. 17 parts water, 1 part coffee. We're going to pour 5 times. So we're going to start with a bloom. And for those of you who don't know what a bloom is, we're going to pour 50 grams of water in this recipe, wait 30 seconds. This kind of allows the coffee to degas any CO2 that's built up in the grinds and ideally give us a more even extraction afterwards. So we're going to have 4 pours of 50 and 1 pour of 35, equaling 5 pours in total. Each pour is going to take 10 seconds, and I'm going to wait 10 seconds between each pour. I like to just flatten out the bed a little bit before I start here. Tare your scale. Switch it to stopwatch mode, and let's get started. Now, some people like to stir in this first blooming phase. For my recipe, I like to just keep no stir, no swirl of the bed. I find it's just one step that can introduce another variable of error for me. So I try to control the evenness of the bed and extraction with how I pour the water rather than stirring at the beginning. And I'm just pouring gentle concentric circles here, really not trying to agitate the bed too much. All right, so with this recipe, you should be done pouring around a minute 36, 37, just before a minute 40. We're looking for a total brew time of between 2.5 minutes and 2 minutes 45 seconds. All right, so we're just finishing up here. Make sure you let your water drip all the way through. You should see the bed be dry on top and get those last few drips in there. And finally, before drinking, I always like to just give it a quick stir. This way, get a nice, even cup of coffee. And that's it. Real simple Kalita 155 recipe. Just enjoy. Lovely.